I'm going to present using the latest release of Ubuntu and the latest Pentaho version, which is the data integration tool and the data integration server version 4.5. So when we talk about portable transformations and jobs, what we mean is being able to easily move your development between the different environments. For example, it can be moving from development to test into production. It may be changing the database connection details flexibly, again, usually development, test, production environments. And also we can mean by using local laptops of different users. So how do you move a transformation that is running on one computer to a different desktop or laptop? And so I'm just going to open my first little demonstration. So what I'm doing here in this quite simple transformation is the first step is just generating a dummy row because we need to have at least one row in the transformation. And the second step is just going to write into the log my variable called demo variable. Now let's have a look where we've set up the demo variable. There is a few options that you can use, and the first one I'm going to demonstrate is setting a Java virtual machine variable. So this can be done in your startup script for this development tool. So typically if you are on a Windows machine, it will be a spoon.bat, or if you are using the Linux environment, it will be a .sh script. So if I go into my installation of the data integration tool, and here at the bottom I've got a spoon.sh script. So this is the file that I execute to start the data integration tool. If I open this file, I'll just say display, so it opens up in the text editor. And towards the end of this file, there is about 2 lines of code that's defining the options, the OPT. So all these are environmental variables that get set up for the instance of the data integration tool that I'm running. And what I've done is I have added a demo variable, so I've literally called it demo_variable, and I gave it a value of Julia. So -d at the beginning means that I'm defining a variable. And you would notice that most of these variables don't have a hard-coded value, so it's not Julia, it's something like $kettle log size limit. So we'll address later why that happens, but basically it means that the Java virtual machine variable, so the scope of that variable, is looking at the variables set up inside the data integration tool. But just for demonstration purposes, I've added my own variable, and I called it Julia, or rather assigned a value of Julia. So after I've done that, I needed to restart my data integration tool, and so back here, now I can use that as a variable. So any step that has a little diamond-shaped sign in it, like this one, with a little $sign inside, it means that we can address a variable, we can use a variable in this step. So what I'm going to do, actually, if I hover over with my mouse over this, it says use control space to select a variable to insert. So I'm just going to do it now. I'm hitting control space, and it gives me a list of all available variables. And here's my demo variable. I just need to double click, and it sets the correct syntax, which is using the $sign and the squiggly bracket around it. So if I simply execute this transformation, I'm going to see that I've executed one row, which was this dummy row. And in the logging, I can see that the demo variable is set to Julia, which is this one. Another interesting number in here, when we're looking at this file, is this one, is the XMX, and this is your available Java memory. So if you ever have a transformation that takes very long to run and it runs out of memory, or maybe you have too many steps in your transformation. That's why you can adjust the variable, the memory that's available to your data integration tool. Okay, but this is quite a advanced technique, and you also don't use it quite often. It's more a setup type of use case. So let's have a look at how we can set the variables inside this tool. My second example, I'm going to jump to this one. So imagine we have a text file output, right? And if I run it on my local machine, it's pointing maybe to my desktop. If I give this transformation to someone else and they want to run it on their machine, then obviously their path to the desktop is going to be different from mine. So what I need to do is I need to parameterize the path to that variable, to that file. So in here I'm going to use the variable called demo_file, and then I define the file name as a hard-coded value. And you can see if I hover over with my mouse over the demo file, it shows me what it's currently set to. I can also do, and I always recommend to do it, hit the show file names button, and it shows me the full path of the file name. And I have set this in so-called catalog properties file. So the easiest way to get there is go edit, show the catalog properties file, and here we can find all the variables that have been defined and their values. So if I wanted to add a new variable, I just go to the last row and I use my arrows down to add more rows to it. And then I can define any name and any value. The variables that have a description, they are the ones that are preset in this tool, so we can't change the description. I cannot actually add a description in here, so this is how you can kind of identify the ones that come with the tool by default. And so in this example, I'm using the demo_file. So if I want to go and find it, and it sorts it alphabetically, so it goes right to the top. This is my home Julia desktop. So obviously if you give it to another user, they would just need to go and set their catalog properties and change that, or change this value, or add this is the variable if they don't have it yet, and then they can run this transformation. The catalog properties is a physical file that's being saved, that's sitting in your environment on your computer, and it is typically pointing to a user folder, and it's usually hidden. So if I go here and I go into my home folder, and I need to view the hidden files, there is a .catl folder, and that's the one that has the catalog properties. So if I open this file, it's very straightforward. Simply the same name of the variable and the value. So this is my demo file to find in here. So this is what's typically being used if you're moving transformations between desktops or even between different environments, dev, test, prod. This is probably the most common way of setting the variables. Another interesting example is to have a look at the predefined variables. So in that case, we've set up a variable name and defined the variable value. We also have a number of variables that are predefined for us. And some examples are the transformation name, the repository directory, the location of this transformation file. So this is always predefined, and you can find them by, again, just doing control space, and there's all the whole list of them. There's a step name and the transformation name, repository directory. So they typically look like it's just the naming convention that helps you to recognize those files, those variables. The name dot another name, so that's sort of the dots in the middle help you to recognize those variables. So you can, for example, see what operation system you're running, what version, stuff like that. So if I execute this transformation, I can see in my log that the transformation is 2-PDI own variables, which is this transformation name, and it's saved in the directory home Joe Webner 37, which is the directory I used to save this transformation in. Okay. So we've used another quite often used another good use case for using variables is inside a table input step. So this is a step where I write a SQL statement, and sometimes I might want to pass a variable into this. It's exactly the same way, so I can use the variable just by saying replace variables in script. So it's important that we check that. And again, it's not really visible, but there is a little dollar sign in the diamond shape. So that means that I can use variables. So again, if I hit Control Space, the whole list comes out at the bottom, so I can scroll down and find the variable that I want to use. So if I did, in this case, the variable customer ID, if we just scroll down in here, it doesn't actually exist, so I haven't set it up yet, which means I haven't set it up in my catalog properties file, and I haven't set it up in my startup script. So if I wanted to preview this transformation anyway, I have a few options. I can just run it and in the settings say customer ID and give it a value. I could do the same even if I do a preview, go to configure and set the value. I could also go to edit, set environmental variables and set it here. So this is just to help my development while I'm previewing and developing this transformation. And so I'll just do this quickly. It's running fine. So basically I'm getting the customer name based on the customer number, and here's my result. So what is more exciting is where I set this variable, and I set this variable in another transformation. So it's a more dynamic way of setting variables rather than predefining it in catalog properties. I have another transformation where for the demonstration I'm just setting a value in here, but this could have been as many steps as I needed it to be. It could have been a table input step and few merges and joins and all sorts of fun. And finally, I just set that field that comes from the previous step. I'll make it a variable and I give it a variable name, and I can give it a default value. So then what I want to do is I want to run this transformation first to set the variable, and then run this transformation to use that variable. And to do that, I'm using a job. So the important thing to remember here is that I need to set the variable in a separate transformation before I can use it. And the reason is that all the steps in the transformation will launch at the same time. So if I try to set and use the variable in the same transformation, it won't work. So this is why, in this case, we need a job. My next example is about using so-called named parameters. Named parameters are defined in the transformation or job settings. So if I have a look at my settings here, I go Edit, Settings, Parameters, and I can add a list of parameters in here. So the advantage of doing this is that you don't always have to set the parameter, you can have a default value. So remember when we use the catalog properties option, for example in this example here, right? If I give this file to someone else, they have to set the value of demo file in their catalog properties, like this. If they don't, this transformation will fail. If we use name parameters, like we're doing here, the default value is always preset, so you don't necessarily have to change it. Okay, so in here I've got a parameter called host, and the default value is def. And I can add a description. And again, I'm just writing that value into my log file. So if I run it, I can see that it comes through. So the environment is def. Obviously, when I run this transformation, I can either set it in here, so go edit settings and change the parameter value, or I can do it from the command line. If I do run it from the command line, I just need to add a dash param colon parameter name equals parameter value, as shown here in the comment. And I can also pass the parameter from the job. So let's have a look at that. So this is my job, and again, in exactly the same way, edit settings parameters. I'm setting a parameter name called hostname, and the default value is test. So if I want to pass this value into my transformation, I double click on the transformation step, go to parameters, and I can use the get parameters button to find which parameters the transformation is expecting. And again, I can either use the value or I can use the stream column. So if I wanted to use the stream column, it means I would have another transformation in here that would give me the column with the value that I want to use. But in this case, I'm simply passing down the host name that's defined in the transformation settings. So this host underscore name comes from here, this one. So if I run it now, it will override the default that I have set in the transformation, and it will use the value from the job. So if I look at it here, the environment now is test. So the most obvious use cases for this is database connections, table, text file inputs and outputs. So any kind of Excel or CSV file, or even connecting to an Access database. All those things can be parameterized, and that's where you typically would need this technique. There is another special technique for the database connections. Let's have a look here. I've got 3 examples that are all connecting to the same database using different methods. So the sample data DDBC hard-coded, as the name says, I've just simply defined all the connection parameters in here. The downside of it, if I give this to someone, they will be able to see all my connection parameters, including the password. The password gets saved in the transformation as encrypted, but it's fairly easy to decrypt if you know your way around this a little bit. So I wouldn't recommend this in, say, production use cases. It's fine for me to do a little demo testing, but it's not a good way of doing things. So a better way of defining the same thing is using parameters. So these parameters I have defined in my catalog properties file. And so if I give this transformation to someone else, until they set up these same parameters in their catalog properties file, they won't be able to connect to the database. So it's a safer way of doing it. Another option is to use a so-called Jindy connection. In Jindy connection, what we do is we just define a Jindy name, and separately we define the connection details for this Jindy name. So as we said, all my parameters are sitting in the catalog properties file, but the definition for the Jindy connection are in a different file, and that file is specific to the place where my data integration tool is installed. So if I go to the installation directory of my data integration, which I've got here, there's a folder called Simple Jindy, and there is a file called jdbc.properties. if I look at this file, it's got my sample data definition. So this is my Jindy name, and everything else is, so type means it's a SQL data source, it's a database connection. The driver tells me which kind of database it is and what driver I need to connect to this. This is my connection URL, and there is my username and password. So this is usually as well stored locally on my computer because that's where the tool is installed. And so the slight advantage of using Jindy connection over the parameterized JDBC is that if you do end up running this as part of your BI business intelligence server, so as part of your reporting tool or integrated with the reporting, it will look at the Jindy name that's defined in your enterprise console or on your BI server. If you did use this option, it means that you would have to set up a catalog properties file, which is not usually part of the business intelligence server. And yeah, I think that's it. So we had a look at different ways of defining parameters, and they were setting Java-wide, Java virtual machine parameters, looking at pre-existing, predefined PDI parameters, setting environmental variables in catalog properties, setting variables inside the transformation and using in another transformation, so that's more dynamic, using name parameters, which has the advantage of allowing you to set a default value, and then we'll look to the database connections and the different options of using parameterized or Jindy name. And that's it. Thank you.